it's been a crazy day. So we have, and we're going to try it again tonight. Your second new class rep is Mara Lee Motes. And last week she had some audio and video problems. So she's online. And just, say a few words about yourself. That'd be great.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties last week. I'm happy to be learning alongside of all of you. You are probably all the experts, but I will do my best to be your class representative. So hello to everyone. And again, I'm so happy to be part of this class. Thank you, Barbara.
Great. Well, thanks for introducing yourself and thanks for volunteering to be co-new class rep.
Okay.
I had it open. Okay, so class number 3. Y'all know that, and we're out here at STEC in person, and it's very toasty inside the room. So, okay. This is the information people put into VMS, Volunteer Management System. If you're having trouble, contact Robert and me, and we'll talk you through it. Well, anyway, this is where people stand. And across the top in the yellow is your target. And your AT will be easy to get. And we're starting the field trips. And I have a slide toward the end of this. I've only got like 5 slides, but we have several more on the books. And you'll get to see what those are. Advanced training guidelines. This is a lot of info, but it's on our webpage. Basically, it's just the things you need to think about if you're trying to figure out something's AT, advanced training qualified. A lot of the speakers we have during the chapter meetings, all of them, the ones we have during the monthly chapter, is something that is AT qualified. And you get, like for the chapter meeting, you just get 1 hour for the speaker, not the entire time of the meeting. So I'm sure if you have any questions about this, just check. But if you're looking yourself at something, say that Quinta Mazatlan is providing or something, and you go, oh, you can always send us a message and ask if it would be qualify as AT. So yes. The question was, thank you. The question was the state meeting, which is going to be in October, count as AT. And they also do a monthly TMN Tuesday. So those are the only things I think is on the next slide. They're the only thing that I can't. I'm challenged. So usually ability to interact with the speaker is required for you to get credit. But they've made the TMN Tuesdays, so they're in the middle of the day at noon on a Tuesday. They've made them so that you watch the recording of them and get credit. So people get confused because it's Tuesday and our chapter meeting is on a Tuesday. This is a state provided opportunity, and it's the next one coming up is the 14th. The speaker for our chapter meeting, which is February 14th, great way to spend Valentine's Day, is Marissa Olivia. She's with Rio Grande Valley Health and Nature Liaison with Texas Children in Nature Network. And it's the second Tuesday of every month. And it's usually in person at the Harlingen Public Library. And we have had some of them out here, but check each month you check for the location. But that would be like Marissa's presentation will be for AT credit. Okay, here's field trips that we have booked, and I know it was short notice. I apologize because we were waiting for the guides for Sable Palma and Resaca de la Palma to make sure that we would have a guide at those two places. And we were sort of waiting on the weather. It's been so crazy, but Robert assures me it's going to be warm by Saturday. So the 18th, the San Benito wetlands, and that will be meeting at the San Benito wetlands 45 in the morning. The Arroyo Colorado Audubon goes and does a bird count. And we've set it up that at the same time, the Jaime Flores, who is over that project and over a bunch of different like the things with the Arroyo and stuff, he'll be there to tell us about the San Benito wetlands and how it's progressing and that kind of thing. The 23rd, we're going to go to Palo Alto, and then in the afternoon, Laguna Atascosa. And then March 4th, we're going to Benson, and then the National Butterfly Center, and hit that end of the valley. And April 1st is Cactus Creek Ranch with bird banding, and then a Laguna Madre Bay tour. There's going to be but these are the ones that we have set up. And here's some of the other ones that we're working with to try to get these scheduled. So lots of opportunities for field trips. And some places that we've never been, but we got invited by several of these groups by volunteering for the Valley Land Fund and stuff. And so they've invited us to come to their places. So and tonight we have Dr. Benavides from UTRGV, Associate Professor of Hydrology and Environmental Science. I did send a link to his UTRGV bio, and he's first, and then after that we'll have John Young, an environmental specialist with TxDOT.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Jude Benavides. For those of you that have not met me or heard of me, I'm a professor here of hydrology and environmental sciences at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. I'm primarily almost 100% in the Brownsville campus. I've been part of the Brownsville community since I was born back in 1970. Left in '88 to go to college, went to the University of Notre Dame, go Irish, where I got my civil engineering degree. And with concentration in environmental. And I also got a commission in the United States Navy as an officer. I spent 6.5 years active duty, and then came back to Texas after my deployments. I went to Rice University to get my master's and my PhD in environmental science and engineering up in Houston, there at Rice. That's where I met my wonderful wife. I moved back to Brownsville in 2005, where I've been a professor at what was then University of Texas Brownsville / Texas Southmost College, and then got my tenure and promotion to associate professor, and then it became University of Texas Brownsville after they went through after they went through a divorce and split from the college. And then in 2015, both UTB and UTPA became things of the past. And we founded the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, and I've been a professor with them. I'm up for full professor here soon. I was supposed to be there already. It just hasn't been a high priority with me with two young kids at 7 and 6 years old. and 6 years old. That sounds like 76 years old. And so I've been happily back here in Brownsville for going on 18 years now, 17 years. And I have happily presented to the Master Naturalist group, just about every year, or sometimes even twice a year, for the last 15 years or so, give or take a few years that I haven't either been able to, or for some reason we got our wires crossed. So it's a pleasure to be back. It's a pleasure to speak to you all about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, watersheds and waterways, particularly in deep South Texas and a little bit of northeastern Mexico. When I first started talking about this topic to the Master Naturalists, I got pardon me, you're going to hear me drinking every now and then. Pardon, it sounds a little rude, but I did wake up with a little bit of a cold, and I'm nursing a bit of a sore throat. So, but that tea is making me survive this onslaught on my vocal cords. When I first started presenting topics about hydrology, I would get some questions every now and then from members of the crowd saying, hey, we're a Master Naturalist group. How exactly does your topic of hydrology fit in with us? And it's not because I didn't think it was, it just wanted more clarification. And it's a fairly straightforward answer. We live in a delta of the Rio Grande River and nearby subdeltas in and around it. And the surface water that is provided to us by the river, as little as it is sometimes, and as much as it is sometimes, is what basically created every topographic, ecological system, and even the beaches, geologic system in this region. We owe our agriculture to it, we owe our industry to it, and we certainly owe our population centers to it. So we are very much a community that is on the border, by the sea, as that used to be Brownsville's slogan long ago. They changed it. I wish they hadn't. I loved it. And tells a lot about who we are as a community and as a region. So I'll be talking a little bit about the waterways and watersheds. Here in this image you see here, this is an image of downtown Brownsville. And those of you that are from the valley or have lived in the valley for a while may have heard the term resaca before. And the term resaca is a term that has been used in Latin countries now for what we think hundreds of years now to refer to areas that are some very much like wetlands. But it's not an ecological term, but it is definitely a hydrologic term to show areas of water that are at one point wet and another point dry. Hydrologically speaking, the foundation of a wetland. So we'll talk a little bit about what those are. The yellow line you see here in front of you is the watershed for the urban resaca called Town Resaca in Brownsville. Let me ask a question. Can you all see my mouse when I move it on the screen?
No. No. I'm sorry, yes. Very vaguely. Very vaguely.
Yeah,
very
we
vaguely.
can see it.
Okay. Okay, cool. Right in there in the middle of this, you can see this sinewy body of water that has been truncated several times by roads and railways and other things. Then you can see it disappears. It goes actually underneath Highway 7783 and then pops up again down here and forms a little bit of what we call the duck head resaca. You can see the bill and the head. And then it goes into a ditch, a drainage ditch that will feed out this way, and it goes off the screen to the right. And then eventually drains into the Brownsville Ship Channel. The UTRGV campus, Brownsville campus, is right here, right in here. The Texas Southmost College's campus is right here. The old Fort Brown is right. The historic Fort Brown used to be right about here, and then the more modern and Fort Brown in the 1900s, by the 1800s, moved to this area right around this definite oxbow of the Rio Grande. Right here. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but I wanted to orient this first picture and tell you a little bit more about the specific area that I'm from. And if you have the opportunity to visit Brownsville and downtown, you'll see these resaca systems and water bodies all throughout the city. So let's start at the very beginning. A watershed. Those of you that don't know, it's an area of land. It's our geographic accounting unit for hydrologists. It's basically an area of land that drains to a common point. So rainfall that occurs in that area drains to that common outlet. In this case, we have two different pictures of the Rio Grande watershed, or Rio Bravo. showing that it is indeed a binational watershed, with the upper portion mainly in the United States, Colorado, New Mexico, and West Texas. The middle portion conjoins both the United States and Mexico, and the lower portion now is primarily in Mexico. And you can see here in this larger picture the same watershed image, and showing some of the hydraulic features that we have in this area, in some places where we sample for water quality, not just us, but here at the university, but all throughout the university, both the University of Texas system and others. But you can see that a whole slew or bunch of tributaries in Mexico, namely the Rio Conchos, the Rio Salado, the Rio Pesqueria, the Rio San Juan, are important contributors of the water that we have in the Rio Grande. The Pecos River and Devil's River here in the United States are very, very much arid rivers that have, and becoming quite saline in the Pecos side. The Devil's is still relatively pristine. But we have two major dam systems on the river. We have the Amistad up here, which has actually taken over about an eighth of the Devil's River, and Falcon, which I see as one of your field trip opportunities. If you get the opportunity to do that and get to Falcon, if you haven't, I strongly encourage you to do so. You'll see what I like to call the hill country of the valley in that region. It is very similar to the southern edges of what we more appropriately define as the hill country in central Texas, and starkly different in ecology, hydrology, and topography than the central and eastern parts of the valley. The important part here is that the basic tenet of hydrology is that water flows downhill. It's not complex science at that level. It also flows uphill sometimes if you have money to make it do so and to pay for the energy in order for it to do so. So we also try to hold water in these dams for the purpose of flood protection and for water supply. There's a little bit of electricity produced by both dams, but not really. These are not really hydroelectric dams. They don't have really big elevation changes across them, but they do produce a little bit of electricity, primarily for the dams themselves. But their primary purposes are water storage and flood protection. And you can see that without cooperation from Mexico, the lower portion of the Rio Grande's water could be held by the Mexican state. We have a treaty with them that dates back now over 70 years that says we're going to share this water equitably by a treaty and contract. And that also applies to the Colorado River out in California and Arizona. So it's a very complex system because it moves from a very arid western side. It is binational, and not only that, the delta itself is bifurcated or cut right down the middle. And that is a rarity in the socio-political and hydrographic landscape. Coming up to Texas, we have the major river basins of Texas over a kind of a hill-shaded digital elevation model. And those of you that are familiar with Texas rivers can identify major rivers like the Colorado, the Brazos, the Trinity, obviously the Rio Grande. Near and dear to us is the basin that is between the Nueces River, here in number 21, this basin, and the Rio Grande Basin, which you can see almost disappears to nothing right in here, a very thin sliver. It's not, at this scale, you can't even see it down here at the southern end. And that is, unbeknownst to a lot of people, we are not in, most of you, unless you're right on the border, you are not in the Rio Grande River Basin. You are actually in a basin, an inter-riverine system, coastal basin, that is called the Nueces Rio Grande Basin right here. And this is what happens all up the Texas coast and happens anywhere where rivers are meeting their base flood elevation, which is typically sea level. This whole area of the coastal plain here in Texas is extremely flat. Rivers, because of its governing principle of water flowing downhill, says, well, I don't exactly know which way downhill is. So I'm going to meander. And I'm also going to change lanes every now and then in history, depending on where maybe, I don't know, Beaver builds a dam, or a hurricane blows a bunch of drift somewhere, or the geology for some reason has changed there's a sudden land shift, and that can, I'm talking about simply a bank collapsing, can change the direction of a river and its delta. But whatever happens, in every circumstance, all of the major river systems you can see, for example, if you focus on number 12 here, the Brazos, you can see how the watershed narrows as it gets to the coast. The same thing for 14, the Colorado, as it narrows as it gets to the coast. And in between those narrow watersheds, you have the interriverine coastal watersheds that are called by the name of the adjoining river system. So for example, 13 is the Brazos, Colorado, because it is between the Brazos and Colorado natural levees or watershed system. Ours is very large, 22, because of the great sand sheet, the Gulf Coast sand sheet, that is there geologically all throughout Brooks and Kennedy counties. And you've all driven through that when you drive up 77 or 281. You drive through a sandy area that's filled with oaks and different live oaks and different types of foliage. A very, very different system than the clay / riverine / loamy deposits of soil that we have in the valley. So you're driving through that large Nueces Rio Grande coastal basin, and you live in that coastal basin, not in the Rio Grande River basin, if you live in the valley, unless you live right along that border. And that is not because of a man-made or human-made levee. It is exacerbated by that. It's not because of the border wall or the levee wall or anything like that. It's because of the natural levees that are formed, which we'll talk about here in a second. So if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to interrupt me. So there's a close-up of our basin that houses most of the valley, with the exception of the far western side in southern Starr County. Zooming in a little bit more to watersheds of interest for us, I have the a green watershed here that is newly formed. I'm proud to say that I've had a big role in getting that watershed officially delineated by the state and called, I wanted to call it the Brownsville-Resaca watershed. I got overridden by public comment, and it is now the Brownsville Ship Channel Lower Laguna Madre watershed. That is its official name, that area in green. The area in pink, pinkish purple, lavender, whatever color that is the Arroyo, Colorado watershed. And the area north of that there are others. There's the North Floodway and the Raymondville Drain, and others that are being delineated a little bit more carefully as we speak. And then, of course, there's the Rio Grande watershed, which is that white area between the Blue River and the pink and green area right in here. So our area in the valley is exceptionally complex hydrologically because, again, the principle of water flowing downhill, when that gradient is not steep, water likes to move wherever it likes to move. And then you add the fact that we have coastal and periodic storm surges, we have development, and well, before we had development, we had irrigation and agriculture. And so all of these systems change the topography and the landform and change the direction which water is going to go. I have here some rough lines that the federal government at the US scale level dictates our major waterways in our system. They're not exactly perfectly accurate, but you can see they're rather different than up here on the left, where you have a bunch of small tributaries or arroyos draining into the river. Here you have different situation. You don't have anything draining into the river. In fact, we'll see that we have stuff draining away from the river. And the Arroyo Colorado, which actually does have a few little tributaries here, but it's not this simple. Next slide shows the next layer of detailed waterways, including some irrigation ditches and drainage canals and other topographic waterways that we have. And when I say these are waterways, get out of your mind. I know you should know this, but just to make sure, these aren't flowing pristine rivers that are crystal clear. And in fact, they often don't even have water in them at all. But they are depression areas that will convey water from time to time. But that's not even it yet. If you add all of the drainage ditches, you add all of our tile drainage systems for agriculture that we know about and have, you can see how complex the waterways are in Hidalgo, Willacy, and Cameron County. Far more miles of waterways and canals than we have roads. kind of zooming out a little further so we can talk about the delta. You can see evidence of the delta here. The evidence of the delta, Rio Grande Delta, is very pronounced right in front of you. And I hope you can see it there near the brackets Mexican side. You have the Laguna Madre and the lower Laguna Madre of the United States, and they have the Mexican Laguna Madre down here. But interrupted by that are a bunch of landforms that are there because of the Rio Grande itself. They are there. That is the most modern portion of the Rio Grande Delta until its recent shift, we think maybe 7,000 to 10,000 years ago, a little bit of an upturn here, forming the area of southmost in Brownsville. You have numbers of waterways, but no, I don't right off the top of my head, but I could calculate that for you. But my guess would be in the thousands. But per each one, I don't have that comparison. But thank you. It's a great question. So let me kind of show you a little bit about what we have here. You're welcome, Michelle. This is the Rio Grande River right here. This is the U.S. side on the north and Mexican side on the south. This is the ancient distributary system of the Rio Grande. I have them shown in blue simply so they stand out. Again, these do not mean, certainly not blue water, because we're not in a blue water area. We're in a green-brown water area, and most of that is natural. We add to that a little bit here and there. But it also does not mean that there's water in all of these systems. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you have a very ancient system over here where the river used to, we think, and there's strong evidence in just aerial photography, but we also have soil data and slight topographic signature remaining, because these are probably 20, 25,000 or more years old. The natural levees and the surface depressions and bends of the river that were found there that long ago have long since been worn down by air and water erosion, aeolian and aquatic or water erosion. More modern, in the case of 10 to 15,000 years ago, possibly here and or here in the Arroyo. And you can see these systems that the Rio used to come out here. And in fact, there is a subdelta way up here, north of the U.S. side word up here out in the Gulf that used to be fed by Resaca de los Cuates when the river primarily flowed through that area. So thousands of years ago, when sea level was a little lower, we had a delta way up here. The land itself was here. Sea level was way up here, the shoreline. Now more modern is this area right in here. With a recent turn over those Resaca systems, and we don't know the exact date. Exact absolute dating of these systems is very difficult to do with standard carbon dating because there's so much sediment deposition from the low areas of this river that we don't have a lot of carbon in the system that is datable. In other words, it's usually gone in that system. It's such a flashy system. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But if I throw in the anthropogenic channel systems, disregarding these bay outlines right here at the bottom right here, in light blue and light green, you can see also on the Mexican side how complex the system is from both the natural and anthropogenic or human influence side. And that's not to mention whether or not there's water in these systems. So the delta, which used to be an area of very inundated water for a few months and then dried out for several months or a year or two, depending on the flashiness and the amount of water flowing through the river system, now has a bunch of surface water being impounded not only in the dams and reservoirs upstream, but in our irrigation channels, in our drainage ditches, in our resacas and oxbows, in the river, and of course in our coastal systems when you start to add a little bit more salt. This is a close-up of the Brownsville, Harlingen, Los Fresnos, South Padre Island region, which is really one big community now, with the exception of this interstitial area right here that there's not a lot of development in outside of the coast. The Bahia Grande, Palo Alto Battlefield National Historic Park, the Brownsville Navigation District, and the Port of Brownsville. You can see 5 resaca systems here and major distributary channels from older to younger, north to south. The pinkish de los Fresnos, or salmon-colored de los Fresnos, actually flows through San Benito because it flows through the area that was officially Los Fresnos right in here. Doesn't actually flow through the city of Los Fresnos. Now, the almost equally as old, but well, I would say it's equally ancient, but younger system, de los Cuates, or the Twins Resaca, which does flow through Los Fresnos and Bayview and kind of continues through Laguna Atascosa, is one of the largest systems that is water maintained by irrigation culls, using the system for irrigation water conveyance. The green system you see here, or Rancho Viejo, obviously flows through Rancho Viejo, but also flows through Brownsville. In fact, a much longer portion of Rancho flows through Brownsville, Texas, than Rancho Viejo itself. You can see how long this system is, and that it actually seems to end or intersect the Rio Grande down here, where it says United States and Mexico, Mexico, twice just in case. But it actually doesn't intersect. It was overlaid by great bass fishing. Yeah, there's still a lot. I can't exactly tell you because it's private land and all that other stuff. But I have a friend of a friend of a friend who lets me go bass fishing in one of the stocked portions of the Resaca de los Cuates, and you can't have a line in the water for less than 10 seconds before you get hit. And they're still great fishing throughout a lot of these Resaca systems. A lot of them are becoming overrun with alligator gar and other invasive species, but there are prolific amounts of fish in these systems. They are highly, highly, highly productive systems, both under the waterline, at the waterline, and above the waterline. But you can see, if you see right here, I'm going to show you this a little later, tilapia, yep. Down here, you can see the green line actually continues into this little lake system down in here. And I'm going to show you later how it continues. So the Rio Grande is something, probably a big storm surge with a massive hurricane, actually made the river turn northward here and abandon one of these older channels that would used to head more towards the southeast. Resaca de la Guerra or de la Palma, depending on who you're speaking to, it's becoming much more referred to as de la Palma now than de la Guerra, because there was a famous battle associated with the Palo Alto battle there that occurred down here and then moved up to the north. Flows through Brownsville. It's a very important water transfer system for Brownsville Public Utility Board and irrigation. And then, of course, Town Resaca, which I started off with, a very urbanized Resaca system, which of the 5 Resaca systems is the smallest, but probably the singular one that is about 90% function is drainage for downtown Brownsville. If you add all these up, water lengthwise, you're talking probably over 180 to 200 river miles of system, and of which water-wise, water maintained are about almost 100 to 120 water miles that have water in them. Not flowing river water, but water that is pumped into them by humans for the purpose of conveyance, storage, and use, because they are no longer connected to the river proper. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. A lot of you have probably heard the term oxbow. Fewer of you have probably heard the term or phrase distributary channel. Yeah. And a lot of you have heard, when you ask about resacas, we'll hear, oh, that's simple, they're oxbows. Those of you that know people that were students of mine or colleagues of mine know that I get a little bent out of shape when I hear that. And there's reasons for that. It's not just academic, pointy-headed nerd that thinks he knows more than anybody else or type of thing. It's actually a very important discussion that we'll get to a little bit more later. But on the right-hand side here, all of you, I think, are familiar with how an oxbow forms. There's a bend in the river, and that bend starts to erode and pinch out over time, or pinch inward, excuse me, and eventually makes a connection, and then sediment is deposited on that end, and it leaves that portion abandoned. And it's called oxbow because it's very similar to the harness put around oxen that farmers would use, and it's a very important irrigation feature for water storage. And so that is how I've heard that this term came about. A resaca can be an oxbow, but it can also be a much larger system called a distributary, which is the opposite. If you're in the river here of a tributary, rivers flowing from right to left on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see these smaller systems or tributaries contribute water to the river's flow as you're flowing from uphill to downhill and upstream to downstream. But eventually, as you approach the coastline, the rivers start to get a little confused, and the river can jump out and will jump out and form distributaries or distributary systems that distribute, not contribute, but distribute water throughout the delta system. And that's what our large systems of resacas are, and not only in the United States, but also in Mexico, which I'll show you here in a bit. To further clarify the difference between an oxbow resaca and a distributary resaca is this image. You see the image we've looked at before, but added are now a bunch of little blue lakes. Those are oxbows that belong to every part of the riverine system. They can all be called resacas. In fact, they are. Each of them will have its own individual name or local colloquial name. Some of these are completely dried up. Some get filled in, legally or not, for use in agriculture or parking lots or whatever. Some are nested, as you can see here, an older system within a younger system. But it's where the resaca or river used to flow around in that bend and no longer does. And that's not every oxbow. Those are probably about 80 to 90% of them. So we talked a lot about what resacas are already, so I'm not going to go over this slide in particular, but an important point to note is the water levels in these systems, okay, are occasionally augmented via pumping, mechanical pumping, water from the river when there is excess water in the river into these systems, or when a water right is called by an irrigator or a community. So are resacas human-made or are they natural? That's a complicated question. I get that all the time. Well, what I think is they're both, exactly, Thomas. They are naturally created and artificially maintained and managed, which immediately means things are going to get crazy. We have a system that wants to naturally succeed in ecological succession to dry land. And technically should, but we want to maintain it as a waterway. That's going to cost money. That's going to take time. That's going to take effort. And these systems are big enough to be of national importance. They are recently, through the Army Corps, about 10 years ago, through the reconnaissance phase study that we solicited by the Brownsville Public Utility Board, they are now considered of national significance. So that means they can get federal money into them. But they're so small in the big picture of things is that there's going to be a lot of local need to take care of them. And again, now we have even more complexity. We have the natural complexity of the system, the topography, the binational nature, and now we have the complexity of a whole host of different administrative agencies, from federal to state to local in both US and Mexico. And if you can ever think that this orchestra is ever going to get in one room and play a masterpiece, that's my dream, but I'm not holding my breath. It's a complicated system that takes a lot of time and money to make it look other than what it wants to be. This is an image showing topography. On the north side, in the US side, we have high resolution LIDAR topography, or light detection and ranging, which shows higher elevations in blue, lower elevations in brown, and middle in yellow, okay? And it's kind of spread through this, as you see here. These are in meters. In the Mexican side, we don't have the widespread LIDAR data, but we do have the shuttle radar terrain mapping data. And I'm going to show you some close-ups of these images to show you that the resaca systems and the natural levees that they form are indeed higher than the surrounding area. I want to point to a very significant difference between the resaca's topography, which you can see right here. I'm going to point to Resaca de los Cuates. If you follow the mouse right here. You can see that that's yellow around the resaca, which is higher. It's about 10, 11 meters in this area right here than the areas on either side of it. How is that? How is the river system, which we know as flows downhill and cuts into the soil and gets water contributed to it, can actually be higher than the land around it. In other words, if you live on a resaca system, right on the resaca, not in the resaca bed itself, which sometimes happens, you're higher than anyone else around you. And we're not talking inches here. We're talking 5, 10, sometimes 12 feet, which is, for all intents and purposes in the valley, in Cameron County, 12-foot difference is Mount Everest. Look at that signature and compare that to the arroyo up here, right here. Exactly, Thomas. Accumulated deposits of silt. That is what forms the natural levee. The arroyo is not a resaca distributary system. There's a lot of misinformation out there that has been okayed through literature review that I am slowly but surely fighting, and well, I'm fighting consistently, slowly but surely winning. That refers to the Arroyo Colorado as an ancient resaca system. It is not a resaca system. We know it's not a distributary system. It may be an arroyo. It is an arroyo, which is different than a resaca. The terms, the specifics of which, they are colloquial terms that don't hold technical merit. So we can't really, I don't want to argue about arroyo versus resaca. I do want to argue and present a case about a down-cutting system, which you can actually see the tributaries right there. Tributaries, not distributaries, right in here, that drain and cut down. The arroyo cuts down. Water flows into it from the surrounding area. Why? What formed the arroyo? I'll ask that question and see if anybody wants to chat or speak up. We know the resacas, the distributary network, was formed by the Rio Grande. What formed the arroyo? The Colorado, the Arroyo Colorado. What formed it? Remember, water flows downhill. Remember, the resaca systems are higher than the land around it. So you got a major resaca system right here coming all the way. And if you probably just logically, linearly extend this, you're going to meet its intersection right here. This is higher than the land around it on either side. So when it rains right here, what's going to happen? The water needs to find a way out. And it will. And it has. And it does. Into the arroyo. The arroyo is what we call a backwater, okay, drainage system, also called a Yazoo distributary because of the Yazoo River in Mississippi, one of the world's largest backwater drainage systems that runs for thousands of miles, or about 100, almost 1,000 miles. So in other words, rain that falls in this area here, it can't flow into the river. We already discussed how it's in the the Nueces Rio Grande basin. It can't flow up the natural levee of this resaca. So it's going to find a way out, and it does. Here, meanwhile, these resaca systems were deposited on top of the land around it by the river when it came raging through thousands of years ago, carrying sediment and silt and clay and not a lot of rocks, and deposited that stuff over the terrain, on top of the terrain. So when you're done, you have something that looks like this. It used to look like, number one, every time it would flood, the heavier sediment, granular sediments, would fall out of solution, suspension, here. The smaller and finer sediments, the silts and clays, would make it further away from the river. Once the river tops its banks, that water slows down. And what we call the water's capacitance, or capacity to carry objects, decreases with lower velocity. And it deposits out. And over time, you go from 1 to 3. So if you're in a resaca, you're down. If you're on the resaca's banks, you're high, up. If you're in between resaca systems, you're low. And water can't drain from that system into the resaca unless you build a storm drain or you pumped it over the natural levee. Or you cut through the natural levee, which happens from time to time. So coming back to the Brownsville, Harlingen, South Padre area, you can see some flood problems for Brownsville. Can anybody see those? What's one of the biggest flood problems in Brownsville is the areas between the resacas, right here, right here. And one big depression area that is constantly, over the course of thousands of years, inundated by massive hurricane storm surge. Once every 50 to 75 years, we get a big whopper of a hurricane. That storm surge comes from the right, over South Padre Island, over Port Isabel, and all the way in here, and then encounters what? The natural raised levee of Resaca de los Cuates and the natural raised levee of Resaca del Rancho Viejo, and flows in here and then hits this one and stops. And you will find in this whole area silty, sandy, saline soils. And you'll find clay dunes right here, these elevated white little eyebrows. That the clay deposited by the river does get blown by the wind when it dries out. And that's not a common, it's not the only ones in the world by far. But clay, a large nest of clay dunes, which we call lomas, which provide a significant biodiversity topographic signature in the area. Lomitas are small ones. Lomas is the term I'm more familiar with, L-O-M-A-S, but lomas, lomitas, a big one or a small one. Las Lomas, this area here, which is now a preserve area, a national wildlife preserve area, preservation area, and is providing wetland mitigation banking opportunities for construction folks and activities like SpaceX and others to preserve those areas. That elevated loma can be 30 feet higher than the area right next to it. That's Mount Everest. That's protected from even the biggest storm surge that we have outside of maybe a 2,000-year storm or something. So you're going to have upland, in quotes, dryland vegetation, upland dryland species. We wouldn't recommend tracing across those out in the middle of Las Lomas unless you have some big old snake boots, because they're hungry. But they're beautiful systems. If you have not driven out to Boca Chica and stopped at the overlook and seen the South Bay coastal Bay Depression area and the beautiful lomas that are there, please do so. So moving on, the natural levees. This is an image on the right here. Is actually where I live on the bottom right. Across the Resaca is National Wildlife Refuge. It's part of the Lower Rio Grande Valley National Wildlife Refuge. The reason why my wife and I chose this house. And that is deeded to the refuge for I think 100 years. So we don't have any development across our Resaca system, but our streets do drain to the Resaca through the natural levee, through a system of storm sewers. I wish they didn't, but out of the necessity of getting floodwaters out of urban areas, but here's the catch. Storm sewer water isn't treated. It isn't even filtered. Now, I don't change my oil in my front yard, and I shouldn't, because if I do and I spill some oil, that's going right into the Resaca. There are lots of feral cats in my neighborhood, and all of their waste material goes right into the Resaca through the storm sewers when it rains. A lot of leaf and sediment is going to get collected through those storm sewers right into the Resaca. And if you keep in mind, remember, the water in the Resacas are pumped, not flowing. So their water level maintained and they're not constantly flowing. You're talking about huge residence times. So they present a significant water quality challenge when storm sewer activity is introduced into them. And that's one of my leading areas of research. And it's an expensive endeavor to talk to the community and say, we need to pay to preserve these systems. The answer is why? Well, number one, why should I if I don't live on a Resaca? Valid question. Well, some Resacas provide system benefits that are far beyond those that people that live on it. But people that live on it should pay more. And I'm not liked by some of my neighbors for saying that publicly. In the Brownsville Public Utility System, I am a board member of the Brownsville Public Utility, at least for the next 3 months. till my term is up. So I have to be careful what I say here. But I am a board member. I'm not speaking for the board. I'm not speaking for the Brownsville Public Utility Board. But we are the only utility that manages a small irrigation system by pumping water from the river into the resacas for Brownsville utility use. I can pump with my irrigation water, my irrigation pump, which I didn't have to pay anybody for other side than paying for the pump and having it installed. My yard is watered by resaca water, which is pumped by the community at community cost to the system at no extra cost to me, and I can pump till my heart's content. I can run that pump all day long. I'd be living in a swamp, but I'm not paying a dollar for that drop. Trust me, I've tried. And the utility board has asked me to make a donation. And people fight it saying, well, we pay taxes already. The taxes don't cover your water right. I have a water right to that water because I am a riparian landowner, but it shouldn't mean that I get it for free. But I currently do. Trying to change that. Slow going process. It's a huge economic, what we call free rider problem. And I am currently a free rider. And I have publicly and openly denounced and mea culpa, I'm also Catholic, trying to forgive, go to confession saying, this isn't right. Let's fix it. Whoa, easy now, the TANASCA and raising prices and energy. And we can't tax the community that much. So I'm not asking to tax the whole community. I'm asking to tax the landowners on the river that use, on the water, that use the water for irrigation purposes. Everybody else in the valley does. Why are so much of the resacas dominated by private property? Good question in the first place. Well, riparian land is high value. So that's number one. You're going to get a lot of, and it was a fight. It was a fight. Pat Birchfield from the zoo, hats off to him. He is he is my mentor, one of the most individuals that I respect the most in my life. His fight to keep this area natural. This used to be agriculture, by the way, on the left-hand side, and it's now reforested. The resaca, as far as should it be public access, no. That's a question that I'm not a environmental attorney, but I do know enough about it, and I've talked to several people. Because it's no longer a river. Oh, first off, river systems are not public. You have no guarantee of public access to rivers in the state of Texas or anywhere. Okay. Coastal systems you do in the state of Texas, but river systems, there's no guarantee for public access. You can be on the water, and the water is public. If you're floating in the water or standing in the waterway, they cannot claim your own private property. But the minute you touch the bank land, I don't know if those of you have watched Yellowstone, that's a big issue. The same thing up there in Montana. As soon as you step on that land, you're on private property. So somebody could camp out in a canoe or a kayak on my resaca till the day is long. Now I could probably call the police for a nuisance issue, right? That's a whole separate issue because you would too if somebody camped a car out in front of your house and was looking at your house through binoculars. Sure, you'd call the police. They're on public property, but hey, but they would be on public property right here. But access to the river, no, not guaranteed in the state of Texas. You have to have access to a naturally flowing river system, which these are not. So again, complexity. The resaca system is not only topographically complex, hydrologically complex, geologically complex. And when water gets low, they tell us we can't pump water, and then they come and check. Yeah, the other irrigation companies throughout the valley do charge. San Benito, municipal utility districts. It can range from $50 to $150 to different charging rates to help maintain the system that provides water. It's only right, I think. So, where am I on time? I got about another 15 minutes. I have a whole nother presentation here that I give on resacas regularly. The varied and vital roles played by these remnant distributaries and oxbows of the Rio Grande. And I'm going to go through this somewhat very quickly. My wife and I are both environmental engineers. We do a lot of geographic information systems and GIS. So back in 2007, 2008, we were looking to buy some property or a house, and we bought some property up in Los Fresnos, but we decided against developing. We eventually sold that property, and because we wanted to live closer in Brownsville, but we wanted to live on a resaca, but we didn't want. I grew up in a resaca in Edgewater, a 9 Edgewater place in Brownsville, and I want my kids, which are now enjoying the resaca system and boats and fishing and kayaks and not powered boats. But we found this. The bottom picture is a panoramic picture on a sunset of my backyard. That's not my backyard on the other side of the resaca. That is National Wildlife Refuge. But it is beautiful. It is 190 feet of waterfront property, again, that I don't pay extra taxes for, that I don't pay, and I should be. But there's some nuisances too. We got alligator gar, we got raccoons, we got possums, we got skunks, we got occasionally every now and then a wild pig. We've got nutria, yep. Every now and then I've seen a beaver once. I saw a beaver once and I promptly chased it away. We have snakes like crazy, yep. And that's why we have 2 dogs that help keep the snakes at bay. They are vaccinated against rattlesnakes because we occasionally see some big rattlesnakes here. And that's part of living near nature. The other side of this system, stinky ducks, yeah, that poop all over my fence and my dock. But it's the price of paying next to and living next to natural systems. The alligator gar, when I kayak in this resaca system, will scare the living crap out of me when I slide over them and they're half asleep, at a foot below the water in a 2 or 3 foot water zone, and they flap their tail up and knock the kayak. And I'm 200 pounds and the kayak moves like it wants to get kicked over. That's not a fun experience. I have the largest alligator we've seen. We don't often have alligators in this system, but they are present throughout almost all the resaca systems, is a 12-footer. 12-foot resaca system we called hardwood. It was about 10 years ago. Unfortunately, somebody did take him out. They call it a public threat, and had somebody harvest it during the legal hunting time instead of having it relocated, which was unfortunate because it was a beautiful, beautiful beautiful alligator. But anyway, the top right, you see me and Dr. Fierro on some kayaks. We're checking out some cypress. On the bottom, on the right side, middle side, you see an image, a pictographic or an artist rendition of the different types of flora or birds and aquatic species that are present in resacas, everywhere from your alligator gar to your ospreys, to your egrets, the gallinules, gray blue herons, channel cats, you name it. We see these all the time. And then some history, hurricanes, and then some battles that were fought. There's a whole bunch of artwork that is culturally important. But the resaca systems themselves play a vital role in flood protection for the region, not only Brownsville, but for all of Cameron County. Raw water storage, irrigation conveyance, habitat, obviously, for bird and wildlife species, improved aesthetics, park areas, opportunities for recreation and ecotourism and bird watching and fishing, economic development potential if done correctly. The bottom line is the naturally created but human maintained system provides a scarce commodity in South Texas, a surface water body, and typically a fresh surface water body. Fragmentation, sedimentation, ecological succession, natural and interrupted, has challenged these resaca systems. That's my neighborhood again, called Lakeway. This is surrounding undeveloped area that's part of the National Wildlife Refuge. There's a big agricultural reservoir over there on the top right. And it's not a very studied system or set of systems. Why? Well, because we haven't had a university like UTRGV or UTB and UTPA for too long in this region that have been tasked primarily with research. We are now becoming an R1 research institution. We're almost there. And we want to not take our eyes off the students, but we also want to provide the research continuation, the continuous presence of ongoing research at the local scale that is relevant to national, and global scale. And we're hiring all sorts of heavy hitters to continue that work here at UTRGV, and it's something I'm very proud of. Just to brag a little bit, in 2015, when UTRGV started, collectively UTPA and UTB did together about $20 million of federal expenditure, dollars a year of federal grant expenditure. I think it was 14 for UTPA and about 6 or 7 for UT Brownsville. Now, just 8 years later, we're doing 67 million. We've tripled, which is far beyond the level we need for an R1 institution like a UT Austin or a Rice University or a Texas A&M University, College Station. We just need to graduate more PhDs. We need more PhD programs and more PhDs every year, and we'll become a full-blown research institution, drastically different than what I joined, both for the better and for the worse. But that's a whole topic, that's a different topic that I'll talk to you about over coffee if you want to learn more about. Resaca systems, when they go from wetland systems to dry land, once they're disconnected. It's a gross analogy, but you cut off your arm, it ain't gonna live long, okay? And you might not unless you get some attention. And the resaca, once it's naturally, or the distributary, once it is naturally cut off by the process of what we call avulsion and bifurcation, it wants to turn into sea. Our role is to try to actually remove some of that sediment and keep these waterways water level controlled. We have excess water rights for now that we can use them. But what happens in 50 years when we don't, or if we don't have that extra waterway, extra water to pull from the river when the river floods? That's resaca rancho viejo, water level control resaca. Some are not water level control. Some are just inundated with rain when the rain happens. And it looks something like this from the aerial image. And some are so ancient that they've already gone through succession, and they're filled with either invasive species or natural vegetation, but you can still see their fingerprint, even if it's vegetation or even in the soil. If you look carefully there around La Jarita and El Perote, you can see the old signature of a meandering system in the soil. It's flat. It's actually even been cut through with a channel. But why can we see the signature in the soil? Any ideas? Thomas, I think you're on it. I'll just give you one more hint, but I'll give you a few seconds to take a guess. Why can we still historically see different color soil, even in the shape of oxbows? Right here, right here. Sand and salt. Yep, the sand, again, remember these natural levees were created by different natural levees by the flooding action, and they're created by different soil type, granular and then fine. The granular and fine system, the sandy versus the silt systems, will hold water at different rates. And that means if you hold the water on the surface and it evaporates, it's going to leave behind salt. If the water percolates into the system, it's not going to leave behind that salt signature. And you're going to see that in a true color photograph, not enhanced for scientific purposes or anything. And you can see, Google Earth it, go into Mexico along the northeastern side, and you will find these signatures all around the old resaca system, primarily around these red lines. So the last picture I want to show you here is to wrap up the resaca system as a whole, both the US side and the Mexican side. And we have A, B, C, D categories. These are not signed, this is not ready for scientific or for release because it has not been peer reviewed, but we have a rough guesstimate as to hydrologic condition of the resaca systems. A meaning water level maintained. The blue ones are water level maintained. And you can see only in the United States is that done. B is it has enough water either because of some pumping action that is not maintained or because of collection, and it has enough of a natural levee to maintain good vegetation and what we would consider a good hydroecological system. We're fairly confident about these up here. We're not as confident as the classification in Mexico. Yellow are the ancient systems that are so old that they're largely flat. The topographic signature, the natural levees have been eroded down. The thalweg, or the bottom part of the resaca, has been sediment filled up and is more or less flat, very much like this. take that system and channelize it for drainage, we color it red. It's an actual channel system.
Jude, can you point out where the mouth of the Rio Grande is on this map?
Yes, sir. Right here.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That blue black line is the Rio Grande. And you can see how these systems here went from here to here and got overlaid over top. So with that, I wrap up my discussion because I think I'm out of time. I'll entertain questions. I agree, Michelle.
Hi, my name is Sharon McGinley. My question is, recently we've heard that the border wall is impacting the levee system in the city of Brownsville and further west. Can you address any of those particular issues?
The levee wall is impacting the levee system. Even the border wall is impacting the levee system. I wouldn't doubt it. I don't have specific knowledge of any case that I can speak intelligently towards or shed any light on, but I wouldn't doubt it. It's usually a combination of repeated vehicular traffic on top of the natural levee, or I'm sorry, the human-made levee, typically Border Patrol, but I don't want to point the finger at just them. It's being used as a road, because it's elevated and it's a great visual site for them to do their job, their very important job. But how specifically the fence is impacting the levee itself, I don't know. I do know that it's impacting all sorts of other things, private property rights, the movement of fauna throughout the system, and in some cases, to the benefit of flora that is no longer impacted as heavily as it used to be. So there are some benefits, but mostly some huge negatives associated with the border fence. But sorry, I can't speak any more intelligently or provide any more information beyond that.
Thank you. I have another question. After
Yes.
Katrina in 2005, there was a report card issued for the levee system in the Rio Grande Valley, and it sounded like we had a task to do some, repair or renovation of the levees. Can you address where we might be at this point 15, 20 years later?
Yeah, a lot of work has been done on the levees upstream in the Hidalgo area, more upstream than Cameron, the Hidalgo area, the creation of that natural or that levee wall, where a lot of money was diverted away from Hidalgo drainage, inland Hidalgo drainage, and sent towards the river. Unfortunately, they had to pay a lot of money for it to combine a levee and a wall. That bolstered the levees up there. The Cameron County levees have slowly but surely been are in the process of being fixed. They had to be fixed because they were very close to being decertified. And when that decertification occurs, that means that everybody in the Brownsville area and anybody area that's in the resacas distribution system suddenly is no longer officially protected by a levee. And that means we have to pay a lot more money in flood insurance. And we're talking factors of 5 to 10 higher. My flood insurance is, I live right on a resaca. I really don't need flood insurance, but I pay it. It's like $500 a year, $600 a year. We go up to 6,000, 7,000 a year, like that. So there's a huge economic incentive to enhance and protect that levee system. And there will be, if there isn't already, some significant legal action if for some reason those levees cannot be maintained because of the border fence or because of increased traffic. That's going to happen. But they're not decertified. They've gone through the certification process. I'm more concerned about the dams than I am the levees, to be honest. I'll leave that one hanging up there in the air for a while.
So Jude, with what looks to be the majority of the resaca system in western to eastern Cameron County, traveling through different municipalities, who's the governing body that would be in charge of the quality or the maintenance of these flows of these resacas?
I wish I could point to one, and we can't. We have long been pushing the county and the cities to join forces and create a resaca division or committee. Even without teeth, I would happily volunteer to serve on it. But as you know, resacas, particularly those that are maintained with water, are irrigation systems. And either the control of, or what is left of the control of the waterways by the irrigation system personnel, that's a significant amount of control that they don't want to cede. I don't blame them. There's private property concerns. The resacas are natural systems that cross socioeconomic boundaries, cities and counties. It's a very difficult question as to who would have jurisdiction over them. The systems themselves, depending on where you are in the system and whether or not there's sufficient water to float a boat, still is protected under federal systems such as the Section 10 of the Clean Water Act, 404 of the Clean Water Act, and others. But enforcement is a major challenge. I often see retaining walls being built 10 feet into the resaca system where the water line used to be into the waterway so that people can fill dirt in and increase their property. That's without a permit or without some sort of mitigation, that is technically illegal. But getting it reported and getting it enforced ahead of time before the damage is done is a hard thing to do.
Doesn't Parks and Wildlife have a certain amount of say-so in the maintenance and the handling of these systems?
No, it depends. If the resaca is within their parks, yes, obviously. But outside of that, as long as if it's an ecological function, then yes. But tied to the hydrology, no. If it's an ecological function, such as a riparian forest or a rare riparian forest or anything like that, that does come into play. But the resaca itself, no. So nobody. And your answer is nobody has direct responsibility for and control. And I'll go even further. The state, which is largely responsible for its waterways and answers to the EPA, the state EPA, the TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, has a mandate for its waterways to meet water quality criteria. And the Arroyo is in violation of some of those criteria from time to time, namely dissolved oxygen in its downstream and sediment. And parts of the Laguna Madre and others. The resacas are not on any list for water quality degraded areas. The reason why is they are not part of a system that is registered in the state as a waterway because they are disjoint from the river, meaning there's not even a segment in the waterway database for these resacas. So how can we list that segment as not meeting water quality criteria if it doesn't technically exist as a segment? Now, you may say, well, why don't we lobby to get those done? We can, but we have to be careful that I could advocate for that, just like I advocated for forming a watershed for the Lower Laguna Madre Brownsville Ship Channel. But if we advocate and get listed as a segment officially, then we become beholden to those water quality criteria, and we have to meet non-point source pollution criteria without the money to meet it. It's like an unfunded mandate, and that would be extremely unfair to the community. It may have benefits, but those benefits won't pay out for 30 to 50 years, and we will be left paying for it. I would much rather, and this is the track we're currently taking. I don't have control of this. I just advocate for this. Okay, this is not. I'm not the end all be all. And as a quote unquote expert on resaca systems, I'm asked to speak on this or that or the other from time to time, but I don't make the decision. But I would prefer we go slowly with this and start getting local dollars invested in the area with federal and state match. And that's what we're doing with the Army Corps. That's what we're doing. But we have to have somebody with some deep pockets. The irrigation folks don't have it. The drainage district folks don't have it. Fish and Wildlife usually doesn't outside their purview. whether it's Parks and Wildlife or Fish and Wildlife, US or state. Folks that do have it, again, I'm on the board, are utility districts, but it's not in our mandate. The Brownsville Public Utility Board is not tasked by our charter to look after resacas. We look after water, wastewater, and electricity. Now, water, as a water provider, we can make an argument to fund dredging local resaca systems to increase our capacity to store water. And that's exactly how we paid for I don't have it here, the resaca restoration work that we've done. And we started about 10 years ago. The Public Utility Board was running that. But then prior board members said this couple $1 million a year is not in our mandate. We're going to cut down. They cut down that to about $300,000 a year. And we're trying to get the rest of that money leveraged through federal grants. And we've been somewhat successful in doing so. But you're absolutely right. Without a single point of at least administrative head advocating for all systems, I'm afraid that these systems will eventually get beyond our control. They've done some remarkably well, and hats off to the farmers, because the farmers saw their potential as irrigation conveyance systems. And they know more than anybody that standing water requires maintenance. And they did. They invested in an irrigation system that has actually mimicked the natural flooding process of the resaca systems when they call for irrigation water. We were very fortunate that the calls in late spring and middle summer for irrigation water mimic the flood systems that we would get, the spring rains. We don't get the fall flushing of resaca systems like we used to when a major hurricane came through, but that's because we have to protect ourselves from flooding. So you see that the sediment kind of builds up and it doesn't get flushed out by a storm, because if it got flushed out by a storm, it would also flush us away with it. And so we have to go in there and remove that sediment.
Now, removing that sediment and dredging, did you mention a minute ago, are you referring to the work that was done up from the old city cemetery off of Palm Boulevard?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, we started dredging. When I say we, the Brownsville Public Utility Board and the City of Brownsville started dredging at town Resaca because of the multiple benefits of water storage and flood protection that provided protection for everybody.
That was the only one they did, though, right?
Well, we're still doing it. It's a very slow process. And when you're funding at 300,000 instead of 2 million, it's going to take 10 times as long. And so we were planning on getting done by 2017. We still got sections to drain, to dredge. We've done about 80% of it, 70% of it.
Thank you, Jude.
Shallow water dredging is expensive and slow.
Thank you, Jude. That is very interesting. And Robert still remembers what you told him about resaca's not being oxbows from his class in 2014. And he's always
Excellent.
explaining that to people.
Excellent.
So.
You know, one real quick thing is it's not just the semantics. It's at some point, and people have already kind of alluded to this, is at some point there's going to be lawsuits filed on right-of-ways to resacas and what we can and cannot do with them, because they are on top of private property in many cases. I own the land underneath a portion of my resaca. I don't own the resaca itself. If somebody wants to come in and do something, if I want to do something with that land underneath the resaca water body, if it's an oxbow and referred to as an oxbow, right? And we haven't taken this up to high courts where a court decision has been made, and that's a good thing. It's a lot easier to fill an oxbow in than it is a distributary. And so we want to try to prevent that. And so it is in the record where an administrative court, an administrative judge, when the arguments are very equal on both sides, will simply say, okay, this is the people's decision. What do the people call it? And if the people turn around and say they're oxbows, then the judge might say, okay, boom, fill it in. If they turn around and say, no, they're not only oxbows, they're larger systems like this, a distributary system that is technically, while it's disconnected from the river, was only created by the Rio Grande itself, it might be harder to fill those things in. So that's speculation, but we do have some legal precedents for that concern. So it's not only an academic shoulda, woulda, coulda, but it has the potential to save the resacas in the future. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity. I always enjoy presenting with you all. Have a great evening.
Okay, it looks like it's time to get started.
Okay.
And our speaker is online, and his previous coworker, Robin Gelston, our first vice president, is going to introduce him.
Hi, everybody. I hope you enjoyed tonight's speaker. He is a coworker, or was a coworker of mine for 10 years. Our relationship had to do with dealing with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and trying to make TxDOT more transparent and more sustainable so that we would allow ocelots to migrate across the landscape in a much more friendly way. He is also the author of the chapter, Unit 16, on mammals of Texas. He wrote that back in 2009 when he was part of Texas Parks and Wildlife. He has a master's and a PhD working with Dr. Tuis, who is, I think everybody knows, the ocelot expert down here that's been working with ocelots for the last 30 years. And he got his master's and PhD from Texas A&I, as well as his PhD from Texas A&M, Texas A&M in Kingsville. So he's gone to school at both universities under two different, it's the same university under two different names. So John, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Robin. All right, let's make sure view slideshow. Here we go. From current slide. All right, can everybody see that okay?
Yes, and we can hear you.
Great, okay, and you can hear me, okay. It's been a while since I've given a presentation to a Master Naturalist group. I always like doing it, and so I've was a little surprised when I updated this that the number of the mammals of Texas has increased over the last decade since I gave this class, from 157 to now 202 species. And I want to point out that it's not necessarily that we're finding animals that we don't know about or don't discover, but it's because we're doing genetic analysis of some of our rodent species, which you can see here we've added at least a new species of pocket gopher. There's a lot of bats here in Texas. That number hasn't changed any, but our carnivores has gone up. The big one is our offshore cetaceans. It has gone up from 14 to 27. And our biggest diversity here in Texas, where most of our diversity falls, is in rodents, bats, and carnivores, and in our hoofed mammals. But we've also got a couple of interesting things in here, like 5 different species of rabbits, 1 marsupial, 1 mammal, and a manatee, or an armadillo and a manatee. So I've kind of put together an eclectic mix because I felt I needed to pull a piece of what TxDOT has done into this. So what I'm going to do is just kind of briefly touch on a handful of these things. You can imagine we can't go through all 202, but I'm going to touch on some of the more eclectic ones and talk about some of their status and whatnot. And then we're going to spend a little bit of the time quizzing everybody, and this will be an interactive piece. I always like to challenge people that tell me everybody knows what a bobcat looks like. So I have a little thing here at the end where we'll go through the cats of Texas and talk about. So there is a little thing here that we have called accidental mammals. If you note all of our, what I mean by accidental mammals, those of you who are birders know that occasionally a bird gets blown off course and we'll get a white-cheeked Bahama pintail hanging out for a few days, right? Well, we get the same thing going on with these various bats. And mammals are truly unique in that they can walk, they can fly, they can glide, and bats are capable of true flight. And that's part of the reason why we see that we've had one occurrence of a vampire bat, one occurrence of a little brown myotis, and one occurrence of the northern myotis. Now, there have been some who have said that they feel vampire bats could come north with the warming climate. We haven't seen that yet. The only confirmed specimen we have is from 1967, but they're only 50 miles south of the border from it. So it won't be too long until we see them come north and add another species. All right. Mammals that are unique to Texas: Texas kangaroo rat, or paloduro mouse. Here, let me hide that. There's a number of pocket gophers that are really unique, especially in South Texas, the maritime pocket gopher, which is unique to Mustang Island. The thing with pocket gophers, you're never going to see one. All you're ever going to see are these little tiny sand mounds sticking up out of the ground. And you'll see those sometimes on along your rights of ways or in your yards or out in farm fields. And those are always going to be some form of a pocket gopher. And I'll present a little bit more on each one of these in a little bit. It's Texas, so we have a long history of exotic mammals. This is just a handful of them. There's 18 of them down here. And I tell people who tell me that they're on their way to Africa, I say, why go to Africa? Just come to Texas. We can show you everything that they've got in Africa without having to worry about getting eaten by a lion, an African lion, not a mountain lion. But we have a lot of interesting things, and some of these are good, and some of these are a little bit damaging, like our macaques and snow monkeys that have come in. But most of our exotic mammals, other than the feral pig, aren't really competing with our native animals too much. We have one marsupial. That's our Virginia possum. Marsupials, y'all know, give birth to an embryo that then gestates inside, kind of like a kangaroo, and then she'll carry the young around on her back. These guys are common everywhere in Texas except out in the Trans-Pecos where it gets a little bit too dry for them. We've got our nine-banded armadillo. Everybody knows what one looks like. Again, that's a species that goes all the way out and common across Texas except for the far Trans-Pecos. We have shrews and moles, order Insectivora. This is another unique mammal. This order is venomous and uses venom to kill their prey. A lot of these have short or narrow distributions, mostly in East Texas. We do have a desert shrew that comes down into your area in the Rio Grande Plains and also out into the Trans-Pecos. And we have a real rare one, this Elliott's short-tailed shrew, which is right here around where I am, the Bastrop, Austin area. Very limited distribution on it. This is another one that you're probably never likely to see, but unless you find one maybe in the dog bowl outside. They seem to occasionally, that's when I find them, is in the dog bowl where they drown in the water. Rodents, we have a huge diversity of rodents. If you look at the Texas Natural Diversity Database that Parks and Wildlife keeps, you'll see that there's about 19 rodents that are being tracked. Almost all of those are predominantly pocket gophers. Again, it's because we just don't know a whole lot about pocket gophers, and no one's really done a lot of studying on them. But there's two species of, or two groups of pocket gophers, the Thomomes pocket gophers and the Geomes pocket gophers. And you can see they've got small distributions across the state in various parts. So down in your area, you've got the, I believe there's the Texas, the Maritime, the Jones, the Davis, and the Guadalupe Southern. But you wouldn't be able to tell them apart even if you actually caught one. I worked at the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department on a study where we caught pocket gophers. They're really fairly large and very powerful, but they never come up above the ground. You have to dig down and intersect their tunnel and catch them. Other rodents that are kind of unique for Texas, we have a prairie vole. It has very limited distribution, although it was just recently reported from the Pantax complexes, which is up here in the Panhandle. The Presidio mole is a unique unique species of mole for Texas, but it hasn't been seen since the late 1800s. It's likely gone. I don't even know if there's any of these Presidio mole in any of the mammalogy collections around the state. Texas Tech, Texas State, Texas A&M, and UT all have very large mammal collections, and then some of our smaller universities also have collections. And I haven't run across any Presidio moles in any of the collections. We have a really unique chipmunk, the gray-footed chipmunk, that's found only in the Sierra Diablos and Guadalupe Mountains. And this map here kind of shows something about prairie dogs. About 2002 or 3, the Fish and Wildlife Service was considering listing prairie dogs as an endangered species, and the 11 states within their distribution all got together and asked for some leeway to do some additional research. And we actually did a statewide prairie dog count. And you can see from historic records, they were in about 97, 98 counties. And when we went out looking for them and counting them again, of course, they weren't the same numbers that they may have been historically, but we found them in about 88 counties. And the darker distribution, or the darker area here, shows the distribution. We estimated about 170,000 acres of prairie dogs were here, and that's down significantly from the over 1 million acres of prairie dogs that were originally estimated in the 1900s when Vernon Bailey came and did his mammal survey of Texas. We have, so I'm coming back to some of the rodents that we talked about. We have 3 state listed rodents: the Texas kangaroo rat, the palo duro mouse, and the Coues rice rat. All 3 of these are state threatened because of their limited distribution. Texas kangaroo rat is up around the Wichita Falls area, only goes into about 9 counties and used to run over into Oklahoma, but doesn't appear to be right now. They really like eroded sites, and especially along dirt roads. So there's really, this is a kind of a tough species to manage for up in that area. The palo duro mouse is secure where it's at, predominantly because it only occurs in Palo Duro, and the Parks and Wildlife Department owns most of Palo Duro Canyon, or at least where this population occurs. So the only reason it's still considered state threatened is because it's only found in that location. But if you looked at threats to its continued existence, they would be very, very low level, because the chances that development would occur near habitat are low. The Coues rice rat is restricted to coastal grasslands, and we all know what happens with our coastal grasslands. We have a number of them, but they're also very popular for people to move into and to build houses in. So this is a species that's reaching its northernmost distribution in Texas, and it's very common from Mexico to Panama. That's one of the things about Texas and our mammals. We have some species that come up into that where their northernmost distribution is met here. That would be things like the jaguarundi, ocelot, long-nosed bat. We have other species that reach their southernmost distribution here, which would be things like the red bat, and then we just have this whole eclectic mix where some things reach their limits of their distribution here in Texas, and that kind of makes them eligible for state listing a lot, because they're on the fringe of their range. Rabbits, we have 5 rabbits. I've only got 4 listed here. I can't remember what the 5th one was. Swamp rabbits are mostly over in East Texas. They're a very large rabbit. It's very hard to tell them apart from the eastern cottontail, the swamp rabbits on the left down here. When you see them side by side, it's hard, but when you get them real close to each other, you can tell that the swamp rabbit's a lot larger than the eastern cottontail. Of course, you all are familiar with the jackrabbit, and then we have the Davis Mountain cottontail, which is around the Davis Mountains in Fort Davis. That would be extinct. It hasn't been recorded in a while. And one of the largest things that we face with knowing status of our mammals is if they're not game or fur-bearing animals, there's not been a whole lot of attention put to them. So knowing the status of some of these species has been quite challenging. There's just not enough money to look into their status and whatnot. Javelina, there's some concern that javelina populations may be declining in different parts of the state. They do occur out in the Trans-Pecos, and of course you all are familiar with them in your area. I always tell folks if you want to go see one, go to Laguna Atascosa. They're pretty common there. Elk is very unique. Elk is a native species of Texas. It was fairly limited in its distribution out in the Trans-Pecos in the mountain range, was extirpated and then reintroduced. And since its reintroduction, it's been reintroduced into a lot of private ranches. It is now considered an exotic species. So, here's an instance where a native species is now been reintroduced as an exotic, which is kind of unique. Our pronghorn numbers in the Trans-Pecos are declining. There's some recovery coming back, but there's still kind of low numbers. We do have a bison herd. That's a misspelling on my part. Y'all may be familiar with that. It's on Palo Duro Canyon. It's a captive herd, but it is a very intriguing and interesting captive herd. When I was at Parks and Wildlife back in 2005, there was some concern about the genetic diversity of the bison herd. We were not getting good reproductive success out of the herd. And when we worked with some of the universities to look at the genetics, it was because we were getting pretty inbred. And we worked with the Ted Turner Ranch to get a couple of bulls from Dr. Turner and bring them over and reinvigorate the genetics of the herd, and it's been very successful. But when we were getting ready, deciding whether or not to do that and deciding whether we should keep the herd or donate it, the National Park System was highly interested in this herd because it's the most genetically pure southern bison herd that there is. And so they were highly interested in our captive herd. But the commission decided that we should keep it and manage it, and we did. White-tailed deer, everybody knows they're increasing statewide. Our mule deer, they're up and down. I think they're okay right now, but historic numbers the current numbers are lower than our historic numbers. The mule deer is a little more drought. With the places where it's at in the Trans-Pecos and the Panhandle, it's a lot more dependent on rainfall and whatnot than our white-tailed deer numbers are. Bats. We have a whole bunch of bats across Texas, and they range across the entire state. We only have one that's federally listed right now. There is some concern for white nose syndrome has resulted in a lot of bat numbers in the United States declining, and some of our most common bats, like the little brown bat, are now extremely in extreme trouble, and numbers have dropped precipitously. And we may wind up with some more federally endangered bats here in Texas in the short term. One that comes to mind right now is the tricolored bat. There's some question about that, and TxDOT and Texas Parks and Wildlife Department are working together to look at some of our culverts on I-45 up around Bryan and College Station, where it appears that some of the largest wintering roosts for the tricolor bat are in TxDOT culverts under I-45. So we're working with Parks and Wildlife to figure out what those are doing, what we need to manage those, and how we can maintain those and still maintain the roadway. Mexican long-nosed bat, this is the bat that feeds on your agave plants. We have 3 state-threatened bats. One in your area is the southern yellow bat. This is a bat common to Brownsville, the Corpus Christi. And one of the reasons for its endangerment is, look at the palm tree here. This is what they like to roost under. What do we do with our palm trees? We remove all those fronds. So if you'll notice there by the Turia Ranch on 77, you'll notice over the years, maybe 20 years ago, TxDOT would trim those fronds. We don't do a lot of that anymore because we've realized that that was southern yellow bat habitat. So we also have the spotted bat. This is only known from Big Bend National Park. It's a real pretty bat, but not a whole lot known about it anywhere in its distribution, anywhere in the United States. There's just, they're uncommon, but not endangered. They're rare because they just don't appear in large numbers anywhere on the landscape. But they're a very beautiful bat, known only from Big Bend National Park, and they have found it was a lactating female that they found, so there's suspicion that there's probably reproduction going on. Then we have our Raffinus big-eared bat. This bat's probably, this is one of those bats that's reaching its northernmost and southernmost, southernmost and westernmost distribution here in Texas. It's a real common bat to be found in our culverts in East Texas. It's also sometimes found in our bridges. And that leads me into our bridge program. What is Texas doing for bats? And then what some information on why we're doing it. So TxDOT is credited in the U.S. with beginning the Bridges and Bats program. It all came out of this top photo here is the Congress Avenue Bridge. And when the bats took over or moved into Congress Avenue Bridge, there was big concern within the city of Austin and within TxDOT about what kind of damage that might cause to the bridge and whatnot. And they were fortunate to have Bat Conservation International here in the same city. And one of the TxDOT folks, Mark Blostock, an engineer, was friends with Merlin Tuttle and reached out to Merlin Tuttle, and Merlin and Mark began a program of talking to TxDOT about bats in bridges and investigating bats in bridges, and showed that, you know, the damage that bats might cause to bridges was minimal. It wasn't going to reduce the amount of time that a bridge was viable for, and that the positive benefits of it would far outweigh it. So now, you know, we work with various communities to go as far as putting up bat bridges, or not bat bridges, but bat viewing locations. If you don't think that these are popular, they really are. There are some tourism estimates given around 2010 about Congress Avenue Bridge, and it was estimated that the Congress Avenue Bridge generates about $3.2 million. And that's just the people, it's just people who said they were coming to see the bats alone. Now we have other private bat watching locations, and they've indicated that they generate about $5.4 million dollars a year for bat viewing. So bat viewing is quite popular. If you get the opportunity to have a bat viewing platform somewhere in your city or near where you live, I highly recommend working with folks to get it in place. So why is TxDOT interested in conservation? There's a lot of benefits that we see from our habitat programs, and the biggest ones are improved relationships with our regulatory agencies like Fish and Wildlife Service, Parks and Wildlife Department. It also gives us a little bit of cost reduction, cost savings when we say, hey, we're going to replace this bridge and we're going to make it bat friendly by putting up bat boxes. We can sometimes reduce our permitting time. It's also allowing us to mitigate any on-site impacts that we might have, because if we have to widen the roadway, sometimes we may be taking potential roost trees or foraging area. And by making our bridges bat friendly, we can offset that impact right there. Our big interest, why I'm pushing our Bats and Bridges program again is because bats are really under threat, not only from habitat destruction, but white nose syndrome has caused 90 to 100% mortality. This white nose syndrome map is out of date. White nose syndrome has been confirmed in Texas. TxDOT recognizes that our bridges and culverts provide a real opportunity. There's some thought that white nose syndrome in the far south may not have the same mortality effects that it's having on bats in the north. White nose syndrome causes bats to they get this little white on their face. It's a fungal growth, and it basically makes them susceptible to coming out of hibernation in the wintertime. And you can imagine up north when there's snow on the ground and whatnot, there's not a lot of food resources and they tend to die. Our thought is that if they do that down here where we're at, maybe not today, because it's awful cold today, but if they had to wake up and go out and forage, that they would find things to feed on here. But we haven't seen any large die-offs in Texas yet, and the Parks and Wildlife Department is surveying for those, and TxDOT is cooperating with them to monitor and survey some of our bridges where we know we have bats. So there are up to 20 different species that could use bridges, 20 different bat species. Right now, we estimate that we've got, I did kind of a survey of the 55,000 or so bridges that we have. We know that bats like these three types of bridges here, the concrete box girder, and the concrete slab. So we've got about 2,600 bridges in that. So there's probably habitat opportunities for about 25 million bats in our bridges and whatnot. Yeah. We do things actively for bats. It's not just pick a pre-stretched concrete slab beam bridge. We will build bat boxes and put them up under some of our larger bridges. This is a bat box on top here that was under the I-35 bridge in Waco. We took down a bridge that had a fairly large bat colony. We put up 8 of these boxes because that's what we estimated we needed to replace that amount of bridge habitat. It only took us 8 boxes to replace that cubic footage with. And these boxes it took a little while for them to become occupied. It took about 2 years after we put them up for them to become fully occupied, but they're now fully occupied, and there's several thousand bats back under this bridge. This lower structure here is something that was done in Laredo. It's in a culvert. Believe it or not, culverts are very popular for bats. This one was specifically designed with this. You'll note this little, can you all see my arrow moving?
Yeah.
Okay, you can.
Yes.
So this is a little well here, right? And what they did here was they did this deliberately. So, and then roughed the concrete up here and added a little bit of plywood so the bats could come into the culvert and then roost up in here. And should water come up or whatever, they wouldn't get killed or anything. One of the things about these concrete box culverts is they're finished off smooth. And I've been trying to find out how we can work with the concrete box industry to say maybe you could leave one side not smoothed out, leave it rough, and that would allow for a lot more bats to be able to roost on them if they would do that, because it's real hard for bats to get a grip here. I have come into a culvert before and found where there was a small crack or a small spall area where the concrete had broke off, and I will see 200-300 bats clinging to that little spot and clinging to each other to hang in there and whatnot. It's really a little weird to see. We do actively remove bats from our concrete structure, from our box culverts, and from our bridges before we tear them down if we have to take them down. And this is an effort here that we did, and these little white things hanging down are actually bat wells. We waited till the bats left. We had some concrete or some scaffolding here. Then after the bats left, another biologist and I went up here. We taped off this gap, but we were concerned that we might have missed a few bats, even though we didn't see any. So these are called bat wells, and this is a piece of PVC with a little plastic bag on the end. And this is meant to allow any bat that we missed that might have crawled. Some of these gaps, they go up and they split, and they can, bats can wander off 2, 3, 4 inches off to the sides and where we wouldn't see them. So this is meant to allow those that we may have missed to climb along the gap, find an opening, come down through, but because it's PVC and 1.5 feet long, then they can't fly back up and get back in here. And after they've been excluded, then we can take the bridge down and build our new bridge. And the project can move along. And yeah, I talked about this a little bit. TxDOT does have, and I'll show this at the end when I talk about why does TxDOT want to do this. I know everybody thinks we build roads, but we do much more than that. We do have active conservation actions, goals and visions that are aimed at that as well too. So let's moving on, getting into my favorite group, the carnivores. And order carnivore. We'll start this off with our wolves and foxes. There's one thing about our carnivores, that a lot of them are extirpated. And that means that they're still gray wolves in the United States, but they're no longer here in this state. So gray wolf, red wolf have been extirpated from Texas. I think it was the early 70s, the last red wolves were actually captured and put into a government breeding program with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And as far as I know, there's only 1 or 2 locations where they've reintroduced red wolves, and that's off the coast of South Carolina, on an island where they've got real good control of them. There is still red wolves in a captive breeding program, as there are gray wolves in a captive breeding program. We are blessed with a plethora of foxes. Unfortunately, a lot of people aren't familiar with them. Our most likely fox that you're going to see across the state is this gray fox, which is in the middle here. Red fox are kind of central and eastern. They're a little bit less common than our gray fox. And this little guy down here is the swift fox. And 20 years ago, the swift fox and kit fox were separate species, subspecies. Then they were decided, no, they're the same. And now I noticed when I updated this presentation that they're back to being split apart. So in reality, in Texas, we have the swift, kit, red, and gray fox. Swift and kit fox overlap up in the panhandle. And that's really the only place that you're going to see either one of them. They're closely associated with prairie dog towns. We have another interesting little group, raccoons and coatis. Everybody's real familiar with raccoons. That's our procyon animals. But this is the coati. Now, Parks and Wildlife has, over the years, asked for sightings of coatis, and we get hundreds. We would get hundreds, and we try to confirm, and we could never confirm that coatis are still here. I don't believe we still have coatis here in Texas. However, they are just a little ways away, and Mexico and also in New Mexico. This was another species that's reaching its northernmost distribution in the state and was probably never really very, very common. We have a lot of mustelids, that's our weasels, skunks, and otters. There's 11 species, including 5 species of skunk. The black-footed ferret has been extirpated. There has been effort over the years. Let's see, it was 10 years ago when I left Parks and Wildlife Department. So there was an effort in 2009 and 10. If the public was interested in developing a black-footed ferret restoration program, and it wound up. Can y'all hear me, or am I think I'm getting some feedback there?
Can you hear you?
We can hear you,
Okay,
but you
we're
are
still
getting feedback.
Yeah. Let's see what I've like something else on. I don't think I do. Sorry. Anyway, the black-footed ferret reintroduction program kind of fell apart. There wasn't good public support for it, so we dropped it. Black-footed ferrets have been reintroduced in other parts of the country, and it's been a very successful program. And maybe we'll revisit that. Parks and Wildlife will revisit that in another few years again, and see if public perception and attitude has changed. Mostly the objection to reintroducing black-footed ferret was about prairie dog. We have a bunch of bears in Texas, and this is really for a conservation story. This is kind of a accidental success. So when I say accidental success, Texas was home to a very large and robust bear population, had 4 different species or subspecies. Louisiana, American black bear, Mexican black bear, and shoot, I can't remember the 4th one now. But anyway, we had the grizzly bear and 4 other subspecies of black bear. That was pretty much, there were no bears by 1980, 85. However, there were bears just south in Cahuilla, Mexico. There was also bears over in Louisiana. There was a remnant bear population up in Oklahoma. And over the last 30, 40 years, those bears have slowly infiltrated and whatnot. And we now have a breeding population in the Guadalupe Mountains and also in the area around Big Bend National Park, coming all the way over to Laredo. Parks and Wildlife considers that the current range and current breeding range for the American black bear. And then we have had bears coming into East Texas from Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. And actually, Oklahoma opened up a bear season for the first time 2 or 3 years ago. So bear numbers are doing really well. Bears are probably on their way into the state in fairly large numbers. I know that in South Texas, there have been some reports of bears. No one has sent in a photo where Parks and Wildlife could confirm it, or at least not that I've been made aware of recently. But I'm real close friends with the bear biologist who does a lot of work in Mexico, and she's told me that there have been reports of them on the Texas coast. From people that she relies on. And we have a lot of high suitability black bear habitat in East Texas and also out in West Texas. So it's kind of intriguing that we've got a desert population and then a eastern forest population. Now, some of you may be aware that up here in the Panhandle a few years back, there were a number of bear that were sighted and a couple that were captured and relocated. These were bears that were coming out of New Mexico and coming over into the crop fields here because they had run out of food in New Mexico. There was a big drought. There's not a population up in this area yet, and probably won't be for some time. But bears are going to come in from East Texas and up from Mexico and spread out from this area here. So Parks and Wildlife actually feels that there's going to be enough influx that they have started an active Be Bear Aware campaign trying to get people prepared for, if you see a bear, don't panic. If a bear's in the area, just leave it alone, how to interact and be with them, and then also, protect your garbage, because usually bears get in trouble when they start getting into garbage and get around people. There are a lot of threats to our bears. Our highways are one of them. We do get some bear roadkill. We do know that occasionally a bear will, attack livestock. It's very uncommon. Bears are one of those really, for a very large carnivore, it rarely feeds on anything much more than grubs and berries. It eats a lot. It can be really, really bad on cornfields, and for milo and whatnot, it likes to get into crop fields and eat, and a bear can eat a lot. Biggest complaint that I heard from folks were mostly from the deer hunters who said, hey, bears are damaging my corn feeder. We did have some issues. We still have some issues, I think, with illegal and accidental kills. It is okay to protect your life and limbs by shooting a black bear if you feel it's attacking you. You better be darn certain that you can prove it was attacking you, because the game wardens aren't real believing of that a lot of times. I think one of the biggest threats to black bears, even coming back into the state, is still our population growth. And you can see from the map down here in the corner that we've got a lot of hot spots that are just going to continue to grow. The I-35 corridors from Dallas to Austin's going to develop. Houston's closing into Austin area as well. And then the lower Rio Grande Valley is also developing rapidly in the area around Corpus. So these are challenges. Even though we've got bears coming in, this is also going to limit them. And then one of the things holding us back from getting a robust bear population is just the ability of the female bears, to disperse into our area. They just don't seem to be coming in large numbers in East Texas. And we're not sure why they came up from Cahuilla, but don't seem to want to come over from Arkansas or Oklahoma. The river otter, which is in the mustelid family, is a really intriguing and another conservation success story. This map is still the map that is in the Mammals of Texas book, but this map is way out of date. Otters are now probably very close to statewide distribution. Anywhere you have good sources of water, good rivers and creeks, you're going to have otters. We have had otter reported all the way over here in Webb County and LaSalle County now. Parks and Wildlife does a survey every 3 years. They go and they do track count surveys at various bridges, and numbers are expanding. And the last record, I'm sorry, I said Sensaba County. So this is an animal that you're likely to begin seeing around the state more frequently. We are blessed with a plethora of skunks. I think it's pretty cool. A lot of people, not so sure that everybody's a real big fan of skunks. Our most common one is the striped skunk. We do have the eastern and western spotted skunks. We also have the hooded skunk and the hognose skunk. And I'm sorry, I deleted the hooded skunk. So A is our striped skunk. B is, this is an eastern spotted, but the western spotted looks the same. It's just eastern spotted is going to be east of I-35, and western spotted is going to be out there around San Angelo. This is our hog-nosed skunk, and then this is our hooded skunk over here. Now our hog-nosed skunk gets its name from this flattened nose, and the hooded skunk is really about the striping pattern on him. But it's very, the striping pattern on the striped skunk, it's very difficult to tell this hooded skunk from a striped skunk, because striped skunks are highly variable in their striping. They may have a little stripe, or they may have a good broad back stripe. It really takes a little bit to be able to tell them apart. There's not a lot known about the status of the hooded skunk or of these eastern and western spotted skunks, or the hognose skunk. They're just these, for whatever reason, these three are not as ubiquitous and able to reproduce or capitalize it's currently around as much as the striped skunk. So they're still here, and we see them occasionally, but there's not a whole lot known about their status. And now we get into some of the cats, the felids. This is a jaguarundi. I'm going to say that again. This is a jaguarundi. It is a small cat. It is not 40 pounds, 50 pounds. It's about 12 to 15 pounds. It has a really long tail. This cat is probably extirpated from Texas currently, but I will tell you that it is the second most commonly reported sighted cat next to mountain lion. And it's reported all across the state. Historically, this jaguarundi probably never occurred outside of the lower Rio Grande Valley. Yeah, that's all I want to say about that. I got some other slides here. Hold on. Oops. Oh, I missed it. How did we miss that? No. Now we're into it. Okay. So this begins kind of a shift here. How are we doing on time? 8:30. Oh, wow. We're already way behind, aren't we? These are all of our cats that we currently have here in Texas, except we do not have jaguar. Jaguar are nearby in Mexico, and jaguar have been reported from New Mexico, but for whatever reason, we haven't had any come up in here. Bobcats are most common, mountain lion after that, jaguarundi's extirpated, and then the ocelot. This is not a wildcat, but this is, believe it or not, I was at Parks and Wildlife. I got a lot of house cats photos that folks were asking, is this a mountain lion or is this a black panther? And we'll talk about black panther here in a second. So I think I talked about these already. These are extirpated, the margay, the jaguar, and the jaguarundi. Our ocelot, everybody knows, is federally threatened. I mean, you all know the reasons for concern for it, but this is what I wanted to get to. Roads are a threat to ocelots. All these stars around here are ocelot roadkill. Concrete traffic barrier on SH100 resulted in a couple of road mortalities. And so TxDOT has been involved in creating wildlife crossing structures for ocelots for several years, since the late 90s. And a lot of those early crossings, we didn't know a lot of information, so they weren't very well, and they didn't work out very well. But this is our current, and this is a little out of date, but this shows where we're putting up crossings for ocelots and other critters. All these purple dots here, this is the 106 corridor and roadway around Laguna Atascosa. These are now all built. This is SH100, so there's 4 crossings on SH100 and 8 crossings on FM 106. And then you see we've got crossings scattered along 77. There's a new road project coming along here where we've introduced another. Before Robin left, she and I negotiated with the district and the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we believe we've got another 9. There'll be a total of 9 or 10 crossing structures along US 77 from the Los Olmos Creek Bridge up near up near Ricardo, or up near Rivera, down to FM 186 there, roughly. And we've been very successful with our wildlife crossings. A lot of folks would say, well, have you passed a lot of ocelots? We have not seen a lot of ocelots going through the culverts, but we have documented ocelots going through the culverts and approaching the culverts. But we've documented thousands of other species going through: alligators, bobcats, coyotes. There was even a mountain lion on SH 100, and it's amazing because this is the smallest wildlife crossing structure that we have on SH 100. This culvert is only 3 foot tall and 4 foot wide, and this mountain lion, now we only got pictures of him the one time, but he appeared there, and that was the crossing that he used. So, you know, when people ask me, are the culverts or are the crossing structures successful? I say, yes, they're successful. The first year we passed 6,300 animals. I think in our last year's report on SH 100, the estimate was 32,000 animals. Now, not all those animals would have been hit on the road, but a portion of them would have. And so as animals have learned to use the crossing structures, we're seeing even more and more of them use them. So we've passed multiple state threatened species, a lot of SGCNs. The reason we haven't seen a lot of ocelot use is there's just not a lot of ocelots in the area, and there's just not a lot coming out of Laguna Atascosa either. People think that bridge crossings and whatnot are very expensive, and they can be if they're not part of an existing road project. So this is the wildlife crossing at the Uturia ranch. It's actually called the Uturia Wildlife Crossing, and it costs just under $1 million to build. That sounds like a lot of money until you say that the 8-mile stretch of roadway that was worked on here was around $25 million. So it was a small piece of the cost. And if it had been done alone, if we'd have just said, hey, we need a bridge crossing here for wildlife, it would have been much more expensive. That's why when we see new roadways getting built or roadways getting upgraded, I really get interested in what can we do for wildlife crossing structures. I want to take advantage of the existing work to get a crossing structure put in because it's cheaper at that time. This is a very large crossing to monitor. We've got 12 cameras on this monitoring it, and currently they've documented 11 different species. There's a little bit of a problem going on here in my mind for this, is that we have a lot of human and also domestic cat going through this crossing structure. And it's not really surprised because there's nearby community and whatnot. But I think that that has the potential to affect wildlife movement and usage of this a little bit. So we're in discussions with the Fish and Wildlife Service about what can we do regarding domestic cat, and also with Parks and Wildlife trying to see if we can't get some public service announcements about keeping your cats indoors, but we're not having a whole lot of luck with that. This is SH 100. We've got the 4 crossings on it. We also we've been monitoring this project. Part of our commitment when we put these in isn't just to put them in, but to monitor them. And on this project, we did pre-construction, during construction, and post-construction monitoring. And we're nearing the end of our commitment to do post-construction monitoring. That was a 5-year commitment. We spent about $3 million monitoring this stretch. But that had a lot of value to TxDOT, to the community, and also to the scientific research. We've had over 10 graduate students with out of UTRGV get their master's. All of them have published dissertations. Several of them have published papers in the literature, which helps us when we negotiate with Fish and Wildlife Service on future crossings because we know more information than we had. This just shows a little bit more of the crossings on FM 106, just a close-up of it. I don't want to talk about that a whole lot. This is costs again, again, the things can be fairly expensive. We do fencing on 100. You'll recall we did contiguous fencing. On 106, we kind of fence to habitat if we can. Fencing runs about $11 a linear foot. We do cattle guards. This is for at driveway ends where we have contiguous fencing. There's been some of our research has said we wanted to compare bridge grates with pipe guards. The bridge grate is less effective than the pipe guard at keeping animals from crossing over, although neither are 100% effective. So We did some redesign on these, and we'll try these again where we have to. These are our two common cats in Texas, bobcat and mountain lion, and they're continually confused. Which one of these is a bobcat? How about this upper left one? Does that look like a bobcat?
No.
What do you think that one is? If not a bobcat, ocelot?
An ocelot or a domestic.
It's a domestic, right? That's a domestic. What about this guy here over this very large roadkill? Cat? Mountain lion?
That looks like a bobcat.
Very good. That's a bobcat. Yeah. How about this this one here with the scratch post?
Kitty cat.
Kitty cat. Yes. And this guy looking at the spot on the ground?
His ears look like a bobcat, but I can't see any tail, so it's kind of hard to tell.
Exactly. It's a bobcat, though. It is a bobcat. And the guy in the tree is also a bobcat. So this is a thing that I like to kind of point out to people. All of these have bobcat spotting patterns, except this guy and this guy. If you notice, he's kind of got rosettes sitting up there in the tree. Bobcats are highly variable in their color. Now, this is a photograph that I got from two people. They said, hey, there's a mountain lion, and that's this upper left one, on my property. And they sent me this photo. What do you think? Were they right? Is it a mountain lion?
No, that's a bobcat. Look at the tail.
Look at the tail, bobcat, right. And then this lower one here was sent, and graduate student thought he saw a ocelot here at first. So what do you think here, ocelot or bobcat?
I don't know. Those ears aren't right for a bobcat. I don't know.
Short tail, and then there's little tufts there. This is a bobcat. It's showing a rosette pattern like an ocelot, but you can see that the tail ends right there, and then the little tufts on the ears are also a giveaway for a bobcat. Okay, what about here? What's this guy snarling at us?
I think it's a mountain lion.
That is a mountain lion. Yep. And then this one up here, with his eyes sleeping on a rock.
Bobcat.
I don't know what that is. That's an exotic cat, and I'm not sure. It's not a bobcat, though. That's one of the other things we have in Texas, right? We've got a lot of exotic animals. And then, oops, what about this guy down here?
Hybrid? I don't know.
That's not a bad. That is not a bad guess. Actually, this is a young mountain lion. So when mountain lions are born, the cubs are heavily spotted. This guy's probably about 7-8 months old, and so he's starting to lose his spots, but he's still got them. And it's a long tail, and it looks raccoon-like, right, on the long tail. This was taken down in Mexico over a night camera, and it's one of my favorite pictures because you just don't see a lot of immature mountain lion photos out there that are this heavily spotted and whatnot. So this was kind of a trick question there. Okay, real quick on tracking. Which one is the mountain lion paw print, the left or the right?
I'd say the right.
Okay, and
Showing claws.
Showing claws. It's a good guess, but that's mountain lions don't show claws. Anything that shows when you see claws like this, it's gonna be a canine, fox, dog, fox or dog. Mountain lions don't show. They don't register their toenails.
That's right. They're retracted. Yeah, you're right.
Yep. Yeah. Because they're capable of retracting their claws, like your house cat. So they don't show up. The other thing about a mountain lion paw print is they have this very clear 3 lobes at the bottom. Dogs and coyotes have that too, but this middle lobe is less pronounced. You don't see it as well. And this is the bottom of a fountain, my paw print. But this is what I wanted to show you. This is a good rule of thumb. Where'd it go? That's the dog. Hold on. Where's my X? There it is. So when you get to a canine track, right? If you can draw an X between the toes and not intercept this bottom pad here, that gives you a clue that it's a dog or a cat, or a dog, I mean. If you do that with a mountain lion paw print, you're going to hit this back, oops, you're going to hit this area right here. You're going to hit the hind pad. So if you can draw an X through it and you don't hit this lobe here, then it's doggy. If you draw it and you hit that pad, and then you get a mountain lion. And again, no toes. And size does not matter. Mostly when people call me up and say, hey, I saw a really large paw print, it's in mud. And you have to remember that mud distorts things. Other signs of mountain lions, this is a scrape, and then they cover the kills that they make. You have to be careful with this one because bobcats will do this too. Bobcats will cover their kill to come back and feed on it later, but that's pretty typical of a mountain lion. And this scrape is just like what your cat does in the litter box, right? They defecate and then they scrape it up. Okay, so what do we think here on this one? I'm going to just point this out because I'm running out of time. See this very clear 3 lobes at the bottom? That tells me it's a mountain lion track. Not its size, even though this knife is laid in here for size, but those 3 lobes tell me that's a mountain lion track. This will get me in trouble. It always does, but black panthers never has, never will, does not, and will not occur in Texas unless it gets away from somebody who has a pet. For whatever reason, the Smithsonian Institute has told us that you all know that color patterns in squirrels is just genetics, right? We've got white ones, black ones, red ones, gray ones. So why don't we have that with mountain lions? And what they tell me is that we went through a historic bottleneck in glacial times that eliminated the black gene in mountain lion. So I got to go with that because it's the Smithsonian telling me that, and I've never seen a black mountain lion, and all my trappers chuckle. When I was at Parks and Wildlife, I said I don't make a lot of money, but any of you that can bring me a black mountain lion skin, I'll pay you $500 myself. And they all laughed at me because they're like, yeah, you'll never have to pay it out. There are black panthers. There's leopards out of Africa, Asia, and Indonesia. Jaguars can be black, but you'll see the rosette pattern coming through on them. And biologists are just going to remain highly skeptical of black mountain lion reports. I still hold out a little bit that it's just genetics, and it's kind of like in my own family, 10 generations of youngs, and then all of a sudden, one of my cousins pops up with red hair, and comments about the mailman flu, but it was just a genetic aberration that came out down the line. So I would suspect that we could get black mountain lions back again. Okay, another little quick quiz. Which one is the mountain lion here?
Right one.
The upper right, correct. And the jaguar? The jaguar is this lower one here. What about this guy up here? What do you think that is?
Either a house cat or an ocelot.
That's a house cat. It's hard to tell. It's not a wrong thing to guess that as an ocelot, but I actually had to send this photo to Mike Tuis, and he confirmed house cat for me, so I'll go with him. All right, what about here? What we got?
Mountain lion.
Mountain lion, yeah. This is another immature, right? But he's further. You can barely see these darker spots on the inside of his legs and kind of on the outside. And this guy, this is a house cat again. He looks very much like a bobcat. This is another one that Tuis told me was a house cat. And I can't remember why he told me it was a house cat, but he was adamant this was not a. I actually argued with him on this one, and he kind of pointed to the ears and said, "Look, rounded, no tuft." So I had to give it back up on that one. But
Looks like he's got a lot more tail too, doesn't he?
yeah, that's what Mike was keying on too. He was convinced this was a tail. I was convinced it was a foot. But like, you got to bow to the expert. So
Yeah.
how about here, ocelot or bobcat at the top?
The top ocelot.
Yeah, and this guy down here, what do you think?
Bobcat.
Absolutely, bobcat. Again, here we've got a different spotting pattern, right? Just more. Those are house cats. So, what is everybody seeing when they say, "Hey, I had a lot of weird calls at Parks and Wildlife," including one person who called me up and said, "I'm not going to tell you what I saw. I'm just going to describe it: black, orange, and 500 pounds." Well, that's a tiger. We have a lot of exotic cats. We've got servals. We know we have a huge population of tigers that are held in private hands. We have things that are called hybrids. And the interesting thing, you can take two rare cats, two endangered cats, like an ocelot and your house cat, or an ocelot and a tiger, and cross them if you can. And it becomes an unregulated animal because you've now made your version of a pixie bob, which is literally a bobcat and a house cat crossed over. And these don't require any special permit to have and whatnot. And people do this all the time. So, there's always aberrant things out there. What are we? I'm pushing my time, aren't I? Am I over my limit? I guess not. I'll keep going. Wolves and coyotes. This is another thing at TxDOT or Parks and Wildlife that I dealt with a lot. People calling up and saying, "I saw a wolf. I saw a red wolf. I saw a gray wolf," and what we're really seeing are coyotes. And so I really found this to be very, very helpful. This slide here. Wolves are big, very big, and they carry themselves way differently than coyotes do. Coyotes, especially in our area, are 25 to 45 pounds. Wolves are 100 pounds. They're 6.5 feet, 5 feet long. Our coyote is 3 to 4 feet in length, and then their paw prints are just so much larger. 2 inches versus 4.5. But what I key in on for the two is the height of the ears compared to the head. On the coyote, the ears look bigger. The way the coyote carries his tail, you can't always go by that because wolves kind of slink their tail down too. But coyotes mostly carry their tail down. Wolves carry it in a variety of fashions. Then I already said our red wolf is extirpated. This is a coyote on top, and these are red wolves in captivity. And when you see them in comparison like this, it looks pretty obvious, right? But when they're out on their own, we don't know. And then this is the Mexican gray wolf. Now, gray wolves were introduced into Arizona, and there have been a few that have wandered off. So this is why this photo right here on the upper right, this is a gray wolf that was shot and killed in Missouri. And this is the reason why I will never tell people that things like wolves getting to Texas cannot happen. This wolf was collared in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan as a young subadult, and 2 years later he was shot and killed mistakenly as a coyote in Missouri, and he had a radio collar on him. That's how we knew it was from Michigan. And I thought back at that time to all the biologists that got called and told the person calling them, Indiana, Illinois, that no, wolves have been extirpated for decades and you couldn't have seen one. So these things will range really, really far and long distances and take off on jaunts that go several hundred miles. So I'm a lot more cautious now when folks give me a good description of something about what they've seen. And then we have wolf dog hybrids here in the state, and a lot of people will push these out there as oh, this is a wolf. Game wardens investigates. If you ever have a wolf dog hybrid and want to sell it, advertise it as a wolf dog hybrid, because somebody will see it if you don't, and the game wardens will come investigate if you say it's a full blood wolf, because those aren't allowed to be held. But there are a lot of wolf dog hybrids out there, and a lot of people like them, but they're not really a great pet. They're a little wary of people, and they're kind of passive aggressive. They can very quickly get angry. But estimates are there are about 1.5 million wolf dog hybrids in the U.S. in private ownership. So again, this could be something that gets loose and runs around. Okay, so I'm going to just wrap this up right now. One of the things that's interesting about TxDOT, and when I went to work for them 10 years ago, I found, it's one of the reasons that I've stayed with them as long as I have. I found this to be very appealing. Also, that TxDOT has a lot of resources that we can put into management efforts, like ocelot crossings, like back boxes. But TxDOT has created various goals and objectives to kind of guide the department. And some of those goals and objectives include fostering stewardship. And it directly says protecting natural resources and efficiently operating and managing risk. Well, when you think that one of TxDOT's challenges is a safety factor, right? Building highways that are safe for people to drive on. Well, keeping animals off the road is a safety issue, especially white-tailed deer. But there are a lot of other animals that we know may cause collisions, but nobody, including myself, is going to admit that you ran off the road and got stuck because you tried to avoid running over an armadillo, which I did just a few weeks ago. We like to, we promote safety. We're a champion of the safety of culture. We're trying to reduce crashes, and part of our effort to do that is to get animals off the road. These ocelot crossings may not all be suitable for deer, but some of them are bridges, and they are suitable for deer, and we are implementing programs around the state to try to reduce deer car vehicle collisions when we have them. This also helps us to improve and lower our costs. Again, when we go through a sensitive area like around Laguna Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge with a new roadway like we've done on General Brandt Highway there, we have to address the environmental and ecological impacts, and part of that is addressing them for the ocelot, and this does that. And then we're trying to demonstrate a social responsibility and be a leader and best in class in the department or in the transportation industry, and I think we're doing a pretty good job of that. So I know I didn't leave a whole lot of time for questions, but I think we got a couple of minutes. Oh, I have until 9 o'clock, so I do have 10 minutes. Okay. Sorry, no, that was kind of whirlwind.
For those of you that had questions entered into the chat, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask them now.
Thank you. I was a little afraid I was going to run out of time or have too many slides. There was about 80 slides there, so.
I thought it was a very interesting presentation. Thank you so much. And I know you touched on this a little bit, and you talked a lot about reports that people have of unusual species that they find or see. But what should the average citizen do if they spot one of these? I mean, should they just do nothing and chalk it off as, a great sighting? Or is there a protocol to report species that may or may not be extirpated?
So that's a very good question. So I think it is always a good idea to report something that you think that you saw, but try to have physical evidence of it. So Parks and Wildlife Department still, their mammologist still takes and fields calls for various things, but if you have photographic evidence, they're going to be a lot more interested in that. Anytime you think you saw a roadkill animal, especially if you suspect it may be an ocelot or something else, please take time to report it. I know that the service says that they get a lot of calls about roadkill ocelot that wind up being bobcat, but 1 out of every 100 actually turns, or 1 out of 1,000 sometimes turns into being an ocelot. And I'll give you an example of that. A few years back, there was a game warden who got a phone call from someone in Wichita Falls saying, "Hey, I picked up a roadkill ocelot." Well, it was a slow day for him, have a whole lot going on because it wasn't hunting season. So he decided he was going to drive out there. And he said, "Well, I put it in the refrigerator for me and I'll come by." And he thought it would be an opportunity to just talk with somebody about, the difference between a bobcat and an ocelot. And he got out there and it really was an ocelot. And that created quite a little stir because that's, almost 800 miles from any known existing ocelot population. Now, I ran up and collected that animal from him, took it down to Gladys Porter Zoo. We did a necropsy, and based on the condition of the animal, the veterinarian there, Dr. Tom DeMar, determined that it was likely that this was a pet. It was just really, really had a lot of fat, but it had wild rodents in its stomach, so it had exhibited evidence that it was able to feed itself and probably had been running around for at least a couple weeks, but still hadn't lost all that fat from being fed. So that one was kind of a unique situation, but it was important for us to get that because we did do, I pulled a little bit of money together and had A&M Kingsville run genetic analysis on that cat. And it came back as being from a different part of Mexico, not from South. It didn't come into the Tamaulipan zone cats. It was another. So we highly suspected that was an illegal pet that had gotten away from somebody and whatnot. But things like that can be very important because we never know. There's all these things out there at times where lost populations are found. And, up until a few years ago, the only known populations of ocelot were on the Ituria Ranch and the Laguna Atascosa. And then, the East Foundation Ranch started cooperating with some of the universities, specifically with Dr. Tuis and A&M Kingsville, and they found ocelot on the East El Salas Ranch there for the East Foundation. And that was huge because that's probably the largest known population of ocelot in the state now. So Parks and Wildlife is the entity that's kind of responsible for that. I don't take sightings anymore at TxDOT. Those go to Parks and Wildlife. I just don't have the time to investigate them. And we are the transportation agency. And although we have conservation goals and objectives, I have been told, "John, you're not with the resource agency anymore. You're not with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Let Texas Parks and Wildlife Department handle that." So they would be the folks to call. But I would still say folks should call. If nothing else, it helps the biologists to interact with people. And biologists don't get to interact with people a lot during the day. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you for covering the information about the roadkill. I have a question about Highway 48. I travel through there, many of us from the island in Port Isabel and Laguna Vista to Brownsville, and I've noticed an increase in roadkill, especially with some of the pipelines going in and the controlled burning that's been going on. Is there any plans, the animal crossings on 48 in the near future that you know of?
Not recent, not that I know of currently. Now, there are a couple of older wildlife crossing structures that are on 48, and those are being monitored. We do have UTRGV has been doing road mortality monitoring on SH100 and SH48. That's their control road, SH48. So we're aware of the roadkill. If and when SH48 comes up for an upgrade, that will be the time for us to look again at what do we need to do or what can we do additionally to provide for animal movement across the highway. But trying to, without an active road project, the costs get very expensive. So I'll give you a great example. SH100 was done for wildlife crossings, and those 4 wildlife crossings cost right at $11 million. And we did we did 8 wildlife crossing structures on FM 106 for under $2 million. So we built four for 11 million, and we built 8 for under 2. The 8 were part of a larger project, and it was a whole lot easier to absorb that cost, and it was cheaper to put those in as an active road project. So to go out and try to address just wildlife road mortality, we'll be watching for when the road needs to be upgraded or widened or expanded. One of the things that was intriguing that I learned at TxDOT, we build roads for people to not drive on, but we build roads for you to drive off of and survive. So roads that don't currently have shoulders, standards have changed now. You'll notice a lot of roadways are getting shoulders, and roads that haven't got shoulders are probably due for shoulders sometime in the next few years. That's one of the road design standards that have changed. If you notice a lot of bridges in the area, you gradually come up, go over, and go down. That's another bridge standard, right? If you look alongside of the roadway, you'll notice that there's a nice sloped bank there. That's another design standard that is meant to make sure that if you do run off the road, you've got room to, travel and come to a stop before you hit or roll over or anything else. So we have a lot of safety features and things that go into constructing a road that also limit a little bit of what we can do. So, but we'll be watching for an opportunity for that road to get upgraded, and when it does, we'll address wildlife crossings on it then. And
Quick
Any more
question.
questions?
Sure.
Any more
Quick question
questions?
from Jim Grizzard. I grew up along the San Bernard River, which is largely uninhabitable, at least was back 50 years ago. Any rate, have you heard of the ghost wolf of Galveston?
nope, that's a new one. I have not heard of the ghost wolf of Galveston.
You might Google it, but I mean, as a child, this area was totally wild, and they say that it has some of the genetics of the red wolf, and we would observe them, hear them. They're a very interesting creature.
Now, Jonah Evans, who took my position as a state mammologist and now has advanced to another position within TxDOT, was telling me recently that there have been some genetic studies on what were thought to be some coyotes in East Texas around Galveston Island that are showing a good number of characteristics of red wolf, and there's some there's some that think that maybe that they did not completely capture all of the red wolves out of the area, and that there may be some small genetic remnant left. But that's papers kind of create a stir within the within the canid community and the carnivore community, and there's we need independent confirmation of it is what I'm hearing from a lot of others. So, you know, I always like to tell people is what I've learned through my career finally is we know what we know and we know what we think we know and we know so little. And so when somebody tells me, I don't like your mountain lion modeling, John, because I don't believe that they could occur over there. And I look back and I go, mountain lions roamed from the Canadian Shield all the way down to the tip of Argentina and from, you know, Maine to California at one time, and so did wolves, and so all of that area is still suitable. The only thing that isn't suitable is you know where heavy human populations are, and where animals are too far away to move and migrate into those areas. I think there's a big case of that for like the ocelot. We've got a lot of heavy, dense thorn scrub cover out there that looks just like the cover at Laguna Atascosa, but no ocelots in those areas. And so there's some interest in the private sector and some about trying to establish some additional populations of ocelot, but I don't know a whole lot about those efforts. I just hope they're successful soon.
Well, thank you, John.
Thank
You, John. I keep forgetting to talk into this. Very informative. I learned a lot. I didn't identify those as being the correct mountain lion or ocelot or.
I fooled the room of Texas Parks and Wildlife Department biologists with that mountain lion.
Okay, I feel better.
Don't feel bad. No, that
Okay.
that mountain lion photo, that one with all the spots and whatnot on it, that is the most confusing photo, and I gotta hang up on almost anybody with that. Anybody who's not tracked mountain lions, I should say, because the only one who got that one right was the guy who did a lot of time spent trapping mountain lions. So.
Okay. Well, then I feel better.
Yep.
Do you have your hand up, Joy? Or are you saying bye?
No, I wanted to ask a question in regard to the tracking of whether there's been any tracking about reduction in insect or mosquito population based on the bats.
There have been some estimates for how many mosquitoes bats eat, and certain species of bats do eat mosquitoes, but all of the Mexican freetails out of Austin actually fly over to Corpus Christi and feed on corn earworm borer moths as they come across the Gulf. It's really shocking that they hone in on that, but apparently it's been going on for a long time. So there's some estimates out there about mosquitoes, but it's really more on agricultural crop depredation. The bats like to feed on moths. They really hammer the moths much more than mosquitoes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, again, thanks for your time, John. It was a pleasure meeting you, finding out that
Thank you.
spent some time in Morgantown, just like I did.
Yep.
And thanks to Robin for getting John to come speak to us. Now you can just plan on doing this every year because your presentation is great.
Okay.
Good night, everybody. That's the end of class 3.